The fluorescent lights hummed quietly in the empty hallway of Apex Technologies as David pushed his cleaning cart toward the executive floor. It was just past midnight, and the building had that peaceful silence that only came after everyone went home. He liked working nights. No rush, no crowds, just him and the steady rhythm of his work. David had been cleaning these same offices for 3 years now. He knew every corner, every stubborn coffee stain on the carpet, every window that needed an extra wipe. The other janitors joked that he was too thorough, that he cared too much about a job that most people looked right through. But David didn't mind. There was something honest about the work. Something real. He unlocked the glass doors to the executive suite and began his routine. First, empty the trash bins. Then vacuum the carpets. Wipe down the conference table. Clean the windows. Polish the brass fixtures. By 3 in the morning, everything would shine like new, ready for another day of meetings and decisions. Tonight felt different, though. The new CEO had been working late, and his office light was still on. David had seen him around a few times over the past 2 months. Richard Blackwood was his name. Tall guy, always wore expensive suits, walked fast like he was perpetually running late for something important. He had that look that some executives got, like the world was supposed to move out of their way. David tried to stay invisible around the executive types. Not because he was shy, but because he'd learned that most of them preferred it that way. They didn't want to make small talk with the cleaning staff. They had bigger things on their minds. He was wiping down the conference table when he heard footsteps behind him. Sharp, quick clicks on the polished floor. "You there, janitor?" David turned around. Richard Blackwood stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, looking tired and irritated. His eyes had that glazed quality of someone who'd been staring at screens for too long. "Yes, sir, just finishing up here," David said politely. "I can come back later if you need the space." No, just finish quickly. "I need to use this room in 10 minutes. "Of course, sir. I'll be out of your way." David worked faster, spraying the table and wiping it down in smooth, practiced motions. He could feel Richard watching him, and it made the air feel heavier somehow. When he finished, he gathered his supplies and headed toward the break room to refill his water bottles before moving to the next floor. The break room was small but clean, with a coffee maker, a microwave, and a few tables where the day shift staff ate their lunches. David sat down for a moment, pulling out his phone and a folder of papers from his backpack. He'd been reading through some financial analysis reports during his breaks lately. Not company documents, just his own personal stuff. Investment portfolios, market trends, things he liked to keep track of. He was so focused on the numbers that he didn't hear Richard walk in. "What are you doing?" David looked up, startled. Richard stood in the doorway, his face suddenly sharp with suspicion. His eyes locked onto the papers spread across the table. "Just taking my break, sir." 15 minutes, it's in the schedule." Richard walked closer, his eyes scanning the documents. David could see his expression changing, hardening into something cold and certain. "Those are financial reports. Company financial reports." Richard's voice had an edge now, like a blade being unsheathed. "No, sir. These are my personal. Don't lie to me. I know corporate espionage when I see it." "How long have you been stealing confidential information? Who are you selling it to?" David's heart started pounding. This was spinning out of control fast. "Sir, if you'd just let me explain. These aren't company documents. These are my own investment papers. I can show you security." Richard pulled out his phone, already dialing. "I need security to the executive floor break room immediately. We have a situation. Mr. Blackwood, please. You're making a mistake." David stood up, trying to stay calm even as panic crept up his spine. "I've worked here for 3 years. I have perfect reviews. Just look at the papers. You'll see they're not. I don't need to look at anything. I know what I'm seeing." Richard's face was flushed now, angry. No janitor needs to be reading financial reports at midnight in the executive suite. "You think I'm stupid?" 2 security guards rushed in, hands on their belts, eyes alert for trouble. David recognized them both. He'd chatted with them dozens of times during shift changes. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger, someone dangerous. "Escort this man out of the building," Richard commanded. "He's fired, effective immediately. I want him off the property in 5 minutes. And I want all his belongings searched before he leaves." "Sir, this is a misunderstanding." David tried again, keeping his voice level even though his pulse was racing. "These are my personal documents. I have every right to. You have the right to leave quietly, or I can call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and theft. Your choice." The security guards moved closer. One of them, Tommy, had a pained expression on his face. "David, man, let's go. Don't make this harder." David looked at the 3 faces staring at him. Richards was cold and certain, convinced he'd caught a criminal in the act. The security guards looked uncomfortable, but obedient. There was no reasoning with this. Not here, not now. Fine. David gathered his papers carefully, folding them back into his folder. His hands weren't shaking, but his mind was racing through the implications of what was happening. "I'll go." They walked him through the empty halls, past the offices he'd cleaned 1,000 times, past the conference rooms where important decisions got made, past the artwork on the walls that he'd dusted every week. It all felt surreal, like he was watching it happen to someone else at the security desk. They made him empty his backpack onto the counter. His water bottle, his lunch container, his book, his folder of papers. They photographed everything, ran his ID through the system, made him sign a form saying he'd returned all company property. Richard had followed them down, standing with his arms crossed, watching the whole process like he was personally supervising a major criminal investigation. "I want a full report on my desk by morning," he told the head of security. "And I want IT to check what systems he accessed. See if he copied anything else." David almost laughed at that. He had never accessed any systems. He didn't even have a computer login. But there was no point saying it. Richard had already made up his mind about who David was and what he'd done. When they finally let him leave, it was nearly 2 in the morning. David walked out into the parking lot, the cool night air hitting his face like a splash of cold water. His old sedan sat in the far corner where he always parked it, under the broken streetlight that maintenance kept meaning to fix. He sat in his car for a long moment, not starting the engine, just staring at the dark building where he'd spent 3 years of his life. 3 years of watching, learning, understanding how this company really worked from the ground up. 3 years of seeing the good people who worked here, the innovation happening in the labs, the potential that existed if only the right leadership could nurture it. He'd been so close to making something incredible happen, so close to revealing who he really was and what he could offer. The investment proposal was ready. The terms were generous. $50 billion that would have transformed this company into an industry leader, created thousands of jobs, and pushed breakthrough technology into the market years ahead of schedule. All gone now, because a man in an expensive suit couldn't imagine that a janitor might be more than what he appeared to be. David pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to his assistant. Pulled the Apex proposal. "We're done here." The response came back within seconds. "Understood." "Shall I draft the withdrawal letter?" "Yes. Keep it professional. Just say we have concerns about leadership and cultural alignment." He started his car and drove home through the empty streets, watching the city lights blur past his windows. Somewhere behind him, Richard Blackwood was probably still at the office, feeling satisfied that he'd protected his company from a security threat, feeling like he'd done his job well. He had no idea what he'd really done, no idea who he'd just thrown away, no idea that the quiet man pushing a cleaning cart had the power to change everything, and had chosen not to use that power until he was absolutely certain it was the right thing to do. The test had failed. Not David's test, but Richard's. And failing this test was going to cost more than anyone could imagine. David drove home, already knowing that tomorrow would bring phone calls, questions, and eventually, the slow realization spreading through the Apex Technologies board of directors that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. David woke up the next morning in his modest apartment, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. For a moment, he forgot what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The confrontation, the security guards, the look on Richard's face so certain So convinced he'd caught a criminal, he made coffee in his small kitchen and sat at the table looking at his phone. 12 missed calls. 8 from his assistant, 2 from his lawyer, and 2 from his sister. He called his sister first. "David, I heard what happened," she said before he could even say hello. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, honestly. Just ... processing it all." "You stayed there for 3 years." 3 years. And they threw you out like garbage." Her voice was tight with anger. "I told you this experiment of yours was going to end badly." David smiled despite everything. His sister had always been protective, ever since they were kids growing up in their mother's tiny apartment in Chinatown. She'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for his college when their mom got sick. She'd been there through everything. "Wasn't supposed to end like this," he admitted. "But maybe it was always going to. Some lessons you can only learn the hard way." "So what now? Are you coming back to New York?" "The family office needs you here." "Soon. I just need to tie up some loose ends first." After he hung up, David spent the morning doing something he hadn't done in years. He went through old photo albums, physical ones with actual printed pictures. There he was at 23, fresh out of business school, cocky and ambitious. Standing in front of his first startup office, a cramped space above a dry cleaner. He'd been so sure he'd changed the world, and he had in a way. The fintech company he'd built had revolutionized mobile payments across Asia. When he sold it for $2.3 billion at age 42, the business magazines called him a visionary. They put his face on covers. Everyone wanted to know his secret. But success hadn't felt the way he thought it would. It felt hollow, empty. He'd made money, sure, but he'd lost touch with something essential along the way. He'd become the kind of person who only saw spreadsheets and projections, who forgot that behind every number was a real human being with real dreams and real struggles. So he'd done something crazy. He'd disappeared. Changed his name legally to his mother's maiden name. Took a job as a janitor. Told almost no one except his closest family and his most trusted assistant. He wanted to understand business from the bottom up, to see what he'd been missing from his executive suite view, the Chen family office. Run by his relatives and managed by people he trusted completely, continued its work while he was gone. They invested in promising companies, managed portfolios, made careful decisions. But the big moves, the $50 billion plays, those waited for David, because nobody understood the full picture like he did. His phone buzzed. His assistant, Catherine, he picked up. "The withdrawal letter has been sent," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Apex Technologies received it at 9 this morning. I'm already getting calls from who? Their investor relations department, the board secretary, and 3 major shareholders who want to know what happened." David sighed. "Tell them we'll be in touch, if appropriate." "Keep it vague, David." Catherine hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" Apex was perfect. The battery technology, the team, the potential. You spent 3 years on this. I spent 3 years learning that potential means nothing without the right leadership. Richard showed me exactly who he is. And I believe him, so we just walk away? $50 billion worth of opportunity. We walk away from him. The company still has good people. We'll see what happens next. After lunch, David decided to go for a walk. He needed to clear his head to think about what came next. He'd been so focused on Apex for so long that he hadn't considered alternatives. Now he needed a new plan. He ended up at a small diner he used to visit after his night shifts. The owner, an older Greek man named George, looked surprised to see him during the day. "David, you sleeping okay? Never seen you here in daylight." "Got fired last night," David said, sliding into his usual booth. George's expression darkened. "Fired you? But you're the best worker I ever seen. So careful, so honest. What happened?" David told him the story. George listened, his face going from confused to angry, to finally settling on something like sad understanding. "I see this before," George said, pouring David more coffee without asking. "Rich boss. He thinks he know everything. Think everyone below him is stupid or criminal? My cousin, she worked 20 years as secretary. Got fired because new boss thinks she too old. Good people thrown away like trash. It's not right, David agreed. No, it's not right. But his life. George leaned against the booth. You know what you do now? Not exactly. Find better place. Better, boss? You're too good for people who don't see you. David smiled. If only George knew. But he appreciated the kindness, the simple human decency of someone who saw him as a person, not a threat or a tool or an opportunity. Meanwhile, across town, Richard was having a very different morning. He'd arrived at the office at 7, feeling satisfied with how he'd handled the security situation. He'd protected the company, done his due diligence, made the tough call that weak leaders avoided by 9:30. That feeling had evaporated. His assistant knocked on his door, her face pale. Mr. Blackwood, you need to see this. She handed him a letter on expensive letterhead. The Chen family office. He'd been chasing them for months, trying to close what would be the biggest investment deal in Apex's history. $50 billion. The kind of money that would make his career legendary? He read the letter once. Then again? Then a third time, his stomach sinking with each word. We regret to inform you that after careful consideration, the Chen family office has decided to withdraw from investment discussions with Apex Technologies. While we respect the innovation and potential within your organization, we have concerns about leadership alignment and corporate culture that make this partnership untenable at this time. No. Richard grabbed his phone and called the head of investor relations. Victoria, what the hell is this? The Chen deal is dead? I just found out myself, Victoria said, and he could hear the panic in her voice. I've been trying to reach their representative all morning. Nobody's answering. Try harder. This deal represents everything we've been working toward. Everything I've been working toward. Richard, I need to ask you something. Did anything unusual happen recently? Any incidents that might have affected their perception of us? Nothing. Everything's been smooth. If anything, I've been tightening up our security, making sure we're running a tight ship. There was a pause on the other end. What do you mean by tightening security? Just standard stuff. Fired a janitor last night who was snooping around with confidential documents. Probably saved us from a major breach, actually. Another pause, longer this time. A janitor? Last night? Yeah, caught him red-handed in the executive break room. Why? Richard, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Every detail. Something in Victoria's voice made his confidence waver. He told her the story, trying to make it sound as professional and decisive as possible. When he finished, Victoria was quiet for so long he thought the call had dropped. Victoria, you there? I'm here. Richard, I need to make some calls. Don't do anything until you hear from me. She hung up before he could respond. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Richard tried to focus on other work, but his mind kept returning to that letter. The Chen family office wasn't just any investor. They were the investor. Connected to every major player in the Asian market, with tentacles reaching into European and American finance. Losing them didn't just mean losing $50 billion. It meant losing credibility, losing momentum, losing face in front of the entire industry. At noon, his assistant knocked again. The chairwoman wants to see you. Conference room A immediately. Elizabeth Winters was already there when he walked in, along with Victoria and 2 other board members. None of them looked happy. Sit down, Richard, Elizabeth said. Her voice cold enough to freeze water. He sat. His mouth suddenly dry. Victoria has some information to share with you, Elizabeth continued. Information that I found deeply troubling. Information that you apparently didn't think was worth mentioning to anyone on this board? Victoria opened her laptop and turned it to face him. On the screen was a photograph of a man in an expensive suit, standing at a conference podium. The caption read, David Chen, former CEO of Paywave Technologies.
I'll be cute.
Speaking at Singapore FinTech Summit 2019, Richard stared at the photo. The face looked familiar, but he couldn't place it. That's the janitor you fired last night? Victoria said quietly. That's David Chen, the primary decision-maker for the Chen family office. The man who was about to invest $50 billion in this company. The room tilted. Richard felt like he might be sick. That's impossible, he whispered. He He was cleaning floors. He had a mop. He also has a net worth of over $3 billion, Elizabeth said, her voice like ice. He sold his company 5 years ago and essentially vanished from public life. We've been trying to meet with him for a year, trying to convince him to visit our facilities to see our operation firsthand. And it turns out he'd been here the whole time, conducting the most thorough due diligence investigation anyone has ever seen. Richard's mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. But why? Why would someone worth billions work as a janitor? Because, Victoria said, he believes you can't really understand a company from the boardroom. He wanted to see how we treated our workers, how we made decisions when nobody important was watching. He wanted to know if we were the kind of company worth investing in. And you just showed him exactly what kind of company we are, Elizabeth finished. Or more specifically, what kind of leader you are. Richard sat there, the full weight of his mistake finally crashing down on him. The janitor wasn't a janitor. The security threat wasn't a threat. And the biggest opportunity of his career had just walked out the door, escorted by security, humiliated and dismissed. I didn't know, he said weakly. That's exactly the problem, Elizabeth said. You didn't know, and you didn't care to find out. You made assumptions based on a job title and a quick glance. You threw away a good employee in a $50 billion deal because you couldn't. Imagine that someone pushing a cleaning cart might deserve your respect. The meeting lasted another hour, but Richard barely heard any of it. His career, his reputation, everything he'd built was crumbling around him. And all because he'd looked at a man with a mop and decided he knew everything he needed to know. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the next morning at 8 sharp. Richard barely slept that night. He kept replaying the scene in his head, seeing it differently now. The calm way David had tried to explain. The careful patience in his voice, even when being accused. The dignity he'd maintained while being escorted out by security. Richard had seen a janitor with papers he shouldn't have. David had been a billionaire taking a break during his shift. Same moment, completely different realities. He arrived at the office at 6:30, 2 hours early. The building was quiet, just a few early risers and the cleaning crew finishing up their night shift. Richard watched them work now with different eyes. The woman carefully dusting the reception desk, the young guy mopping the lobby floor, the older man emptying trash bins with methodical precision. Were any of them more than they seemed? Had he walked past other invisible people, making judgments without seeing them? The thought made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. By 8 o'clock, the conference room was full. All 12 board members sat around the long table, Elizabeth at the head, her expression unreadable. Victoria next to her, looking exhausted like she hadn't slept either. The company's lead attorney, the chief financial officer, the head of operations, everyone who mattered was there to witness what was about to happen. Let's begin, Elizabeth said, folding her hands on the table. I think we all know why we're here. In the past 48 hours, this company has lost the most significant investment opportunity in its history. Victoria, would you please walk everyone through what happened? Victoria stood and pulled up a presentation on the screen. The first slide showed David's photo, the one from the business conference. Professional, confident. Nothing like the quiet man in janitorial uniform that Richard remembered. David Chen, Victoria began. Age 47. Former CEO of PayWave Technologies, which he sold for $2.3 billion. Current primary advisor to the Chen family office, which manages over $80 billion in assets. He's known in investment circles as someone who does unconventional due diligence. He's walked factory floors as a line worker, worked in customer service call centers, once spent 6 months as a delivery driver for a logistics company before investing in it. She clicked to the next slide, showing David's employment record at Apex. 3 years ago, he applied for a position in our night janitorial staff under his mother's maiden name. Passed background checks, passed all interviews, started working here in March of 2022. Perfect attendance. Perfect performance reviews. Multiple commendations from his supervisor for going above and beyond. One of the board members, an older man named Harold, raised his hand. So he was essentially spying on us. Not spying, Victoria corrected. Researching. Everything he saw as an employee with proper access. He never broke into restricted areas. Never accessed computer systems he wasn't authorized to use. He just worked his job and observed. For 3 years? 3 years, another board member repeated, shaking her head. What was he looking for? According to my conversation with his assistant yesterday, he was looking for character. He wanted to know if we were the kind of company that treats all employees with respect. If our innovation came from genuine talent or just marketing hype. If our culture was sustainable for the long term. Elizabeth leaned forward. And what did he conclude? Until 2 months ago, he was ready to invest. He'd seen our battery technology firsthand, talked to the engineers during his breaks, watched how department heads treated their teams. He was impressed. The proposal was drafted and ready to present. Months ago, Harold said slowly. That's when Richard joined as CEO. Everyone's eyes turned to Richard. He felt his face getting hot. 2 months, Victoria continued. Employee satisfaction scores dropped 18%. 3 senior engineers put in transfer requests. The operations team reported increased stress and decreased morale. And then, Wednesday night, Richard encountered David during a break and had him fired for supposed corporate espionage. The room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning show. "Them, the video," Elizabeth said. Quietly, Victoria pulled up security footage on the screen. There was Richard walking into the break room. There was David, sitting at a table with papers spread out. The video had no sound, but you could see the conversation escalate. Richard's aggressive posture, David's calm attempts to explain. The security guards arriving. David carefully gathering his papers while Richard stood over him, arms crossed, face tight with certainty. Watching it now, Richard wanted to crawl under the table. He looked like a tyrant. Like someone drunk on power, so convinced of his own importance that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Those papers, Victoria said, were David's personal investment analysis documents. Nothing to do with Apex. He's been managing his family's portfolio for years. He reads financial reports the way some people read novels. It's what he does to relax. Jesus, someone muttered. Elizabeth stood up. I've been on this board for 15 years. I've seen good decisions and bad decisions. But I've never seen a single choice cost us this much. $50 billion. That's not just money. That's partnerships, contracts, expansion, jobs. That's our battery technology going global instead of staying regional. That's leadership in the clean energy sector for the next 20 years. She looked directly at Richard. And we lost it because our CEO spent 5 minutes with an employee and decided he was a criminal. No investigation. No questions. No benefit of the doubt. Just immediate judgment and immediate action.
Richard wanted to defend himself.
Wanted to explain that he was just trying to protect the company. But the words stuck in his throat because he knew they weren't true. He hadn't been protecting anything. He'd been demonstrating authority. Making sure everyone knew who was in charge. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "I should have asked questions. Should have checked his record. Should have listened when he tried to explain." Yes, Elizabeth agreed. "You should have. But the mistake goes deeper than that, Richard. The real problem is that you saw a janitor and assumed he couldn't possibly have anything valuable to offer. You looked at his uniform instead of seeing the person wearing it." Another board member, a woman named Helen, spoke up. "Can we fix this? Can we reach out to David, apologize, try to salvage the deal?" Victoria shook her head. His assistant was very clear. "David isn't interested in working with us under current leadership. He spent 3 years evaluating this company, and our response to him was to throw him out like garbage. That told him everything he needed to know." "What if Richard apologizes personally?" Harold suggested. "Would you accept an apology from someone who humiliated you in front of security guards?" Victoria asked. "Someone who accused you of being a criminal without evidence. Someone who wouldn't even let you finish a sentence." The room fell quiet again. Elizabeth walked to the window, looking out over the city. "I've spoken with the other board members privately. We've reviewed Richard's performance over the past 2 months, The David situation is the most dramatic failure, but it's not the only issue. We've seen a pattern of poor judgment, lack of emotional intelligence, and a management style that prioritizes control over collaboration. Richard felt his stomach drop. He knew where this was going. Richard Elizabeth turned to face him. The board has voted to terminate your position as CEO, effective immediately. We'll provide the severance package outlined in your contract, but we need you to clean out your office today. The words hit him like a physical blow. Fired. He was being fired. The irony wasn't lost on him. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice shaking. I can fix this. I can reach out to David, make it right. It's too late for that, Elizabeth said, not unkindly. The damage is done. And honestly, Richard, I don't think you understand what needs fixing. This isn't about one bad decision. It's about a fundamental failure to see people as people. The meeting ended shortly after. Richard walked back to his office in a daze. His assistant, clearly already informed, had boxes ready for him. She couldn't meet his eyes. He packed his things mechanically. The awards from his previous company, the framed photos, the expensive pen set his wife had given him when he got this job. Everything that was supposed to represent success now felt hollow as he carried his boxers to his car. He passed the janitor's closet on the ground floor. The door was open, and he could see the cleaning supplies neatly organized on shelves. Mops hanging in a row. Bottles labeled and sorted. Everything in its place. David had worked here, had organized these supplies, had pushed these same carts through these hallways, while Richard sat in his executive office, never once wondering about the person doing the work that kept everything clean and functional that evening. Across town, David sat in his apartment with his sister and Catherine. His assistant, they'd ordered Chinese food, and the containers were spread across his small kitchen table. The board fired him, Catherine reported, checking her phone. Happened this morning? Victoria sent me a message. That was fast, David's sister said. Didn't have much choice, Catherine replied. When the other major shareholders heard what happened, they demanded immediate action. Richard's reputation in the industry is basically destroyed. No one's going to hire him as a CEO after this. David pushed his rice around with chopsticks, not eating much. I don't feel good about it. His sister looked at him in surprise. Don't feel good? David, he humiliated you. Threw you out like a criminal. Cost himself everything because he was too arrogant to see what was right in front of him.
I know.
But ruining someone's career wasn't the goal. I just wanted to understand the company. To make sure my family's money went to something good. Instead, you found out the leadership was toxic, Catherine said. You did the right thing, pulling out? Maybe. David set down his chopsticks. But there are good people at Apex. Really good people. The engineers working on that battery technology are brilliant. The operations team is solid. Even Victoria, she's been trying so hard to make things work.
Oh, what are you thinking?
His sister asked, knowing that tone in his voice. David was quiet for a moment, looking out his window at the city lights. I'm thinking that maybe it's not about the company. Maybe it's just about one bad leader. And now that leader is gone? Catherine and his sister exchanged glances. David, Catherine said carefully. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I spent 3 years learning about Apex technologies. 3 years seeing the potential. One bad CEO doesn't erase all of that. Maybe we should wait and see who they choose to replace Richard. See if they learned anything from this. His sister smiled. You're too forgiving. You know that? Maybe. Or maybe I just remember what it's like to make mistakes. I wasn't always wise. I wasn't always humble. Someone gave me chances when I didn't deserve them. He thought about his early days, the arrogance of youth, the mistakes he'd made, climbing the ladder, the people he'd overlooked or dismissed because he was too busy chasing success. Everyone deserves a second chance, David said quietly. Even companies that fire their janitors. Richard spent the first week in a fog, barely leaving his apartment. His wife tried to be supportive, but he could see the worry in her eyes. The mortgage on their house was steep. Their kids' private school tuition was due. Everything had been budgeted around his CEO's salary, and now that was gone. The second week, he started making calls, reaching out to his network, letting people know he was available for new opportunities. The responses were polite but cold. Everyone had heard what happened. The story had spread through the business world like wildfire. The CEO who fired a billionaire janitor and lost a $50 billion deal. It was the kind of cautionary tale people would tell for years. By the third week, Richard had to face reality. He wasn't going to find another CEO position. Maybe not ever. His reputation was too damaged. So he started looking at smaller roles. Vice president positions. Director level. Anything that would pay the bills and let him rebuild his career from scratch. He got one interview at a mid-sized logistics company. The CEO there was blunt. "I'll be honest with you, Richard. You're overqualified for this position, but you're also unhireable at your previous level. So the question is, are you willing to do the work of learning some humility? Because that's what we need here. Not a hotshot looking to climb back up. We need someone who understands that every person in this building matters." Richard took the job. Assistant Vice President of Operations. It paid less than half what he'd been making. His wife cried when he told her, not from disappointment, but from relief that at least they'd have income. His first day, he showed up early. The CEO gave him a tour of the facility personally. "See that guy?" The CEO pointed to a man restocking supplies in the break room. "That's Raymond. He's been with us 12 years. Knows this building better than anyone. You want to understand how this place really works. You talk to Raymond. You want to know where the problems are before they become disasters. You talk to Raymond." The message was clear. Richard nodded. "I understand." "I hope you do," the CEO said. "Because if I see any of that arrogance that got you fired from Apex, you'll be gone the same day. I don't care about your resume. I care about who you are when nobody's watching." It was a humbling experience, and Richard needed it. He started paying attention to people he'd always overlooked. The receptionist who knew everyone's names and birthdays, the maintenance crew who kept everything running, the warehouse workers who actually moved the products that made the company money. He learned their names, asked about their families, listened when they had suggestions, and slowly, painfully, he began to understand what he'd been missing his entire career. Meanwhile, Apex Technologies was going through its own transformation. Elizabeth had taken over as interim CEO while the board searched for a permanent replacement. She'd been with the company since its founding and knew every aspect of the business. Intimately, her first act was to call a company-wide meeting. Everyone from executives to janitorial staff gathered in the main auditorium. It was the first time many employees had all been in the same room together. "I want to talk about what happened," Elizabeth began, standing on the stage without notes or podium. Just her and a microphone. 3 weeks ago, we lost an investment that would have changed this company's future. We lost it because our leadership failed to see the value in every employee. Because someone looked at a job title instead of seeing the person doing the job. The room was silent. People shifted uncomfortably. "David Chen worked here for 3 years," Elizabeth continued. "Many of you knew him. Some of you worked alongside him. He was thorough, professional, and kind. He was also a billionaire investor conducting the most detailed evaluation any company could ask for. And we threw him out like trash." She paused, letting that sink in. "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to tell you that we're going to change. Starting today, we're implementing a new program. Every executive, including me, will spend 1 week every quarter working in a different department. Not observing, actually working. If you're in marketing, you'll spend a week in the warehouse. If you're in finance, you'll spend a week in customer service. We're going to understand this company from every angle." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, some skeptical. "We're also creating a workers' council," Elizabeth added. "Representatives from every department, every level, will meet monthly with executive leadership. Your voices will be heard. Your concerns will be addressed. Not because it's good PR, but because it's the right thing to do." After the meeting, Victoria approached Elizabeth in her office. "That was quite a speech," Victoria said. "Think it'll make a difference?" "I hope so. But Victoria, we both know what we really need. The Chen investment. Elizabeth nodded. Without it, we can make improvements, but we can't reach our full potential. The battery technology is ready. We have the patents, the prototypes, the manufacturing plan. We just don't have the capital to scale it. David made it clear he's not interested. In working with Richard, yes. But Richard's gone now. Maybe it's time to reach out again. Not to ask for the investment, just to apologize properly. Victoria considered this. It could backfire. He might see it as manipulation, or he might see it as genuine remorse. Which it is. Elizabeth pulled out her phone. I'm going to call his assistant. See if he'd be willing to meet with me. No pitch, no pressure, just a conversation. The call was made. Catherine, David's assistant, said she'd pass along the message but made no promises. 2 days later, David agreed to meet. Coffee shop, neutral territory, just him and Elizabeth. Elizabeth arrived first, nervous in a way she hadn't been in years. When David walked in wearing jeans and a simple sweater, she almost didn't recognize him. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed. Thank you for meeting with me, Elizabeth said as he sat down. I was curious, David admitted. Catherine said you weren't trying to pitch me on anything. I'm not. I just wanted to apologize. Personally, what happened to you was inexcusable. You gave us 3 years of your time, your insight, your dedication, and we repaid that with suspicion and humiliation. David stirred his coffee, watching the liquid swirl. It wasn't you who fired me. No, but I hired Richard. I should have seen the warning signs sooner. Should have acted faster when problems emerged. I failed you as much as he did. They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop bustled around them, people ordering drinks, typing on laptops, living their normal lives. Nobody recognized either of them, just two people having coffee. Can I ask you something? Elizabeth said. Why did you really take that job? I've read about your other undercover evaluations, but 3 years is a long time. You could have learned what you needed in 6 months. David smiled slightly. Honestly, after I sold my company, I felt lost. I had money, success, everything I thought I wanted, but I didn't know who I was anymore. The janitor job started as research, but it became something else. It became real. Real how? I remembered what work felt like when it had purpose. When you could see the results of your effort at the end of the night. Clean floors, organized offices, everything in its place. There's honesty in that kind of work. Nobody's impressed by your job title. Nobody cares about your net worth. You're just a person doing a job, and either you do it well or you don't. Elizabeth nodded slowly. That makes sense? I started this company in a garage, you know. Back then, I did everything. Built the prototypes, answered the phones, cleaned the bathroom. Sometimes I miss that simplicity. Can't go back, David said. But you can remember. You can make sure you never forget what it's like to be the person doing the unsexy work that keeps everything running. Is that what you were testing for? Whether we remembered? Partly. But also whether you could change. Companies get comfortable. They develop blind spots. The question is, when those blind spots get exposed, can they adapt? Elizabeth leaned forward. We're trying to adapt. New programs, new policies, new culture. But I'll be honest with you, David, it's not going to be enough. Not without the capital to grow. Our battery technology is ready. We have orders waiting. But we can't scale production without serious investment. I know, David said quietly. Not asking you to reconsider, Elizabeth clarified quickly. I know that door is closed. I just wanted you to know that we're trying to become the company you hoped we were, even if it's too late for us to work together. David studied her face. She looked tired but determined. There was no desperation in her voice, no manipulation, just honesty. Tell me about the changes you're making, David said. Not the PR version, the real version. So Elizabeth did. She talked about the Workers' Council, about the executive rotation program, about the employee surveys and the listening sessions. She talked about the 3 engineers who'd been planning to leave but decided to stay after Richard was fired. She talked about the challenges, the resistance from some senior managers. The difficulty of changing a culture. David listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You know what the hardest part of my 3 years at Apex was? David asked. Watching potential go unrealized. Seeing brilliant people held back by poor leadership. Watching innovations slow down because of office politics. It was frustrating because I could see what the company could become if everything aligned properly. And now? Now I'm curious whether you can actually pull off this transformation. Whether the changes will stick or fade away once the pressure's off. Elizabeth met his eyes. There's only one way to find out. David smiled. I suppose there is. He finished his coffee and stood up. Thank you for meeting with me, Elizabeth. And thank you for the apology. It means more than you might think. Will I see you again? Elizabeth asked. Maybe, David said. Let's see how the next few months go. Keep making changes. Keep listening to your people. If you're serious about this transformation, it'll show. Walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Elizabeth with a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a final no either. That night, David sat in his apartment. Looking at the proposal documents his team had prepared months ago, the Apex investment. $50 billion that could transform an industry. His phone rang. Catherine. I saw Elizabeth's message, Catherine said. She thanked you for meeting. Said it gave her hope. She's genuine, David replied. I believe she wants to change things. So what are you thinking? David looked at the documents in his hands. 3 years of research. 3 years of understanding Apex from the inside out. All of that knowledge, all of that insight, sitting unused because of one man's mistake. But that man was gone now. And maybe, just maybe, the company was ready to become something better. I'm thinking, David said slowly, that people deserve second chances. Companies too. Let's give them 3 months. See if the changes are real. And then we'll decide. 3 months, Catherine repeated. And if they pass the test, then maybe we'll have a conversation about the future.